good afternoon, everybody, and I will give a brief introduction to CLARIN. As I've been told, you don't necessarily know what CLARIN is, and so we have a small presentation video to show you.
Language is core to human existence and the key to understanding our world. CLARIN, or Common Language Resources and Technology Infrastructure, is a platform that provides easy and sustainable access to a broad range of digital language data and tools for scholars in the social sciences and humanities and beyond. CLARIN brings together resources from a network of participating centres in more than 20 countries from across Europe and further afield. All CLARIN centres follow the same standards for metadata, so researchers can combine datasets and tools regardless of their location. Martha, a historian from Denmark, is doing research on World War II. With CLARIN's Virtual Language Observatory, she can browse a list of resources filtered by year, language, country, and more. Finally, she's found what she's been looking for: a set of voice recordings from France and a digital collection of German newspapers. Paul, a political scientist from the Czech Republic, is interested in gender issues. In just a few clicks, he can access a vast collection of expertly curated parliamentary debates from many different countries. He takes advantage of CLARIN's text mining tools to explore differences in language use between male and female politicians. As some CLARIN tools are easy to use, they can also be integrated into lectures and seminars. With a single sign-on, all these resources are just a few clicks away. Many of these datasets and tools are open access, are available in many different languages, and include not only text but also speech and video. In addition, researchers can safely deposit their own datasets and tools in CLARIN's repositories, where they're easily findable and citable. CLARIN can help with developing research data management plans and actively supports small and large projects in the network in collaboration with their host institutions, helping to turn innovative research ideas into reality. The list of people who can benefit from what CLARIN has to offer is almost endless. For example, anthropologists, linguists and political scientists, teachers and students, software developers, clinicians, journalists, translators, and museum curators. The virtual nature of the infrastructure also means that it's easy to collaborate with other scholars and experts in the CLARIN community. CLARIN contributes to easy access by making all resources fair. Fair means that data and tools are findable through CLARIN's discovery portals, are accessible through a single sign-on, are interoperable thanks to CLARIN's promotion of open science standards, and are reusable, because CLARIN ensures that its users know what they can and cannot do with any given dataset. Broaden your perspective. Discover CLARIN today.
So, yeah, what is CLARIN? So this video gives you a brief but very smooth and advertisement-like overview of what CLARIN is. But so it provides you access to tools and resources, language tools and language resources. That's the main idea through a single sign-on, which I tend to call the research paywall. So if you are a member of any academic institution in any of the CLARIN member countries, then you have access to all the CLARIN resources. CLARIN also serves as an ecosystem for knowledge sharing and training, and this Café is an example of the knowledge sharing and training initiatives that are mainly under the good hands, good treatment of Juliana, who is taking care of these things. CLARIN is one of the European research infrastructures in social science and humanities open cluster, and it's involved in actively shaping the European Open Science Cloud, which are projects that have an even wider scope than CLARIN. CLARIN currently consists of 70 centers or more in at least 24 countries. I say at least and more because this is very dynamically changing. And as you can see, we are covering a large part of Europe, and we're trying to be more, get more countries involved. And the way that CLARIN works is mainly that we have repositories in each of these countries, and the repositories collect linguistic resources like corpora, lexica, wordnets, grammars, language models these days, and also a set of tools like taggers and named entity recognizers and query engines, corpus query engines, and all these tools and data resources, they have metadata describing these tools and resources. And it is these metadata that you can search through using the Virtual Language Observatory, which is like the Google search of CLARIN. No? So we have you have the search bar, and you have faceted search. You can specify on which languages and or on which centers or which type of medium you're looking for, a speech or text or video or anything else. You can specify in this query engine. So I would suggest you get this to this presentation later, and that you try out and test some of these links querying for your needs. There is also the language resource switchboard, which serves as a tool discovery service, so you can upload some text or submit the URL to text or type some text, and then through automatic language identification, you will get a list of available tools for that language to process text in that language. The CLARIN search engine, so the VLO, tends to give you a very abundant results, and so there's besides those queries, there is also the CLARIN resource families, which are manually curated and categorized sets of data and tools, as you can see on specific types of data. CLARIN is more than just tools and resources. It's more and more evolving towards also a knowledge infrastructure in which we share knowledge, or we try to share knowledge with as many people as possible. Therefore, we are setting up knowledge infrastructure through the knowledge centers, which are centers specialized in specific languages or specific topics. So if you have any questions, you might look for a knowledge center, so a case center, which is specialized in the topic you have a question about, and then you might either find the information on the websites of these knowledge centers, or all these knowledge centers also have a service desk which should reply to you within a few working days with either an answer to your question or a forward to a pointer to where you could find people or more knowledge to solve your question. CLARIN also provides informational, legal, and ethical issues, which is especially useful in these days where GDPR and AI acts are getting updated very often. CLARIN also works on standards to have the same type of processing of corpora and tools and data sets over different countries and different projects, so it becomes easier to integrate them all into one information infrastructure. And we have a user involvement committee that tries to involve as many as users as possible, and also monitors how many users we have. So the CLARIN Trainers Network is another aspect in which we are setting up a database of specialists in certain topics, which could be then requested if you organize a summer school or a training event in your university. Then you could ask one of these trainers to come to explain a topic on at your site. The CLARIN ambassadors then are people that are trying to make CLARIN better known in either countries which are not yet member countries or sectors of science and innovation where CLARIN is not yet known. There is also, and this might be interesting to many of you, is the mobility grant. So if you are from a CLARIN country and you want to visit another CLARIN country or a center in a CLARIN country at least, then you could check whether the mobility grants would be applicable for your case. And so you might get part of your travel refunded by CLARIN. There is a CLARIN Learning Hub. This is Juliana's baby, more or less, where you have a number of tutorials and workshops and where we collect relevant information about training and so on. And then there is some publications. Let's say not scientific publications, but more stories about what happens in CLARIN, what the impact of CLARIN is, and how it works, and what the parts are. And I'll leave it at that for now as a brief introduction into CLARIN.
So, good afternoon. My name is Amelie Dorn, and together with my colleague Seta Štuhec, we are happy to talk to you today about practical approaches to project and data management in the digital humanities, skills, challenges, and lessons learned. Together with our colleague Markus Pluskowitz, we are part of the ACDH-CH help desk and consulting team, where we support researchers and PIs from the conception of a research project until the project start. With our individual skills and areas of expertise, our main task is to provide support, and especially when it comes to project initiation and preparation, and also the submission process for new project proposals. Why is there such a team? Why is there a consulting team? Well, because with around 130 employees in our institute, we have quite a high number of ongoing proposals and also projects, and that is quite a high number to manage and to administrate. So in order to facilitate a transparent overview of the processes, of the involved actors, and also of the required information, we have created a standardized consulting workflow in our institute that lays out the different stages researchers need to follow to successfully submit a project proposal. So this overview here, together with a more detailed explanation, can also be accessed on our institute's website. As consultants, we cooperate closely with the Institute's central office regarding administrative tasks for the management projects, and we also cooperate with our Institute's directors or the research unit heads regarding decision-making processes. So our Institute has 4 research units: linguistics, literary and textual studies, musicology, and DH research and infrastructure. And our institute promotes research in the digital humanities, through the targeted use of digital methods and the development of innovative technologies. The research unit DH research infrastructure has at its mission a data-first approach and aims to develop and apply a wide range of DH methods and tools throughout the entire research data lifecycle. It prioritizes data at the core of its activities while fostering also knowledge exchange, both internally and with the broader research and digital humanities community. So we all know that managing projects and data is often a challenging and anything but straightforward task. So as researchers, we face typical challenges such as tackling an increased amount of administrative tasks, dealing with time and budget constraints, or coordinating collaboration among diverse teams with varying technical expertise, and also dealing with heterogeneous data sources and quality. So managing data adequately is therefore a very paramount element that also requires very specific skills and know-how. So let's look at this perspective a little bit more closely right now.
So hi, also from my side. As Amelie mentioned, data is basically a heart of all our projects. It's an integral part that, so it is essential that we take good care of it, right? Because maybe an application of a project might not be maintained after the project ends, but the data is something that stays, so it has to be taken good care of it. And for this purpose, we one of our main services at the Institute is ACDH-CH, which is a repository for humanities research data. Well, it's basically a default solution for all our projects, but we also accept, for instance, external projects. All the data and metadata in ACDH-CH are curated, and our main goal is data reuse. And part of this is, of course, also discoverability. So we are integrated in the CLARIN. What Vincent was before mentioning, we are one of these repositories that deliver the metadata. But we also deliver to other European catalogs like OpenAir or Ariadne for archaeological data, and Kulturpool and Europeana for cultural heritage data. So this is here just an example so that you know what we are talking about. This is one front page of the main page of one data collection. And you can see various metadata that come with it. So yeah, there are many, many pitfalls when we are dealing with data, and that should be avoided. And well, probably it's impossible to avoid all of them because we are humans and things happen. But we should at least try our best to navigate through this map of lost data. Now, one of the biggest problems is, of course, data mismanagement during the project that causes data loss and, well, costs us time and nerves. And very often it has to be a personal experience that brings us to understand how important this is, even though maybe sometimes people deem it rather boring. But for instance, my personal experience was when I was writing my PhD, my screen went blue. I caught a mini heart attack. Well, the story had a happy ending. A simple turn off and on again worked perfectly. But, you know, from then on, I do my backups regularly. So it is important, even though it might not be the first thing people want to be doing. And the second perspective is from our perspective, is from as an archive, as a digital archive. Very often it happens that projects contact us very much at the end, which means there are many issues when we are trying to make sense of this data that could very much be avoided if we would communicate a bit earlier. For instance, one of such things is ACDH-CH requires certain metadata for documentation so that we can support this reuse. But if you have to write all this down at the very end, you don't know anymore. Also, sometimes these metadata are recorded, but they are recorded in such a way that we cannot automatically process them. So this also then results in too much work that would not be necessary. Another issue is also often that data management takes time, and very often it gets forgotten when we are writing project proposals and making plans, and most importantly, budget. Another very common thing that happens is that key team members that were dealing with data are not present anymore. We all know that in academia, very often people get employed only on specific projects, and when they end, so does the employment. And when we then end up with this data, we need someone that we can talk to discuss how we can curate the data, because I cannot decide on my own what is worthwhile to archive, what not, so it has to be cleaned. For instance, this here is a real example of a data set that we got to archive. We cannot decide ourselves what is to be deleted, and we don't have access to valid images in case they get corrupt. And another very big issue are unclear legal aspects. It happens quite often that, well, projects need to then in the end publish the data. But if we only then start to think about the rights and what are we even allowed to do with this data, it's a bit late, because clearing all these legal aspects take a lot of time. For example, in digitizing projects, there are always some copyrights or other terms and conditions from archives that are giving this material to be available. Then maybe there are some personal or sensitive data in linguistics projects when there are interviews and so on. So things need to be considered. Also ethical considerations, for example, in some anthropological projects and so on. So it happened already quite many times that we received a lot of data and then we couldn't really publish it directly because these things were not clarified at the beginning. And then, of course, the classical lack of communication. This is probably the main reason why certain things take much more time than actually necessary. Now, for the communication part, I don't really have an answer. But what we try to do at our institute are basically three things to avoid these issues. One is timing, then it's planning, and then probably the most difficult one to go from these plans to actual practice, which is, well, linked to the education. So from timing perspective, of course, data management is something that has to be carried out throughout the whole project. And for archiving, we try to already be a part in the consulting procedure so that we can set the budget and some preliminary considerations. When the project starts, we help with data management plan. And then during the project, we check in here and there to see how things are going. And then when the project ends, we can do a very smooth curation process. So as was already mentioned, many funders now require projects to provide data management plan. And this is also something that we are helping with researchers. There are certain project specifics that we can consider already at the beginning about what data types and volume there will be and costs. And also what kind of standards and regulations there are to be considered, from very general like law, contracts, and So, but also general policies, whether it be institutional or disciplinary. And then, of course, we also have to consider what will happen with all this data once the project ends, how we are going to preserve and share it. And of course, we cannot already decide on everything at the very beginning and set it in stone. Things change, so it's important to revise and update this plan during the project. So yeah, for the third part, very concretely, we have a standard operating procedure for data management. So we decide very clearly on how the versioning should look like, because nobody wants to spend time with thinking what's the last version and then accidentally realize, oh, I was working on the old version. Naming conventions and structures, storage. But also it's important to have that the project leader is aware of this issue and knows that it's important, maybe even have a dedicated person who, like a data steward, who is especially taking care of this, although basically the whole team has to live it. But still, even then, sometimes, even in our team, we are data management people. It happens that things get messy. That's why we carry out dedicated cleanup sessions when we make sure everything is up to date and has proper names. And to educate people further, we have, so to say, a data steward network at the OeAW, at the academy, where we organize workshops, but also offer consulting. There are internships at the ACDH-CH where we cover also this subject, and we offer guest lectures at the University of Vienna.
So to wrap up our presentation, what are the lessons learned so far regarding project and data management? Well, when preparing research proposals, it is helpful to pay attention to technical aspects and data management plans from the very outset, ensuring alignment with the established standards and long-term sustainability goals, such as long-term archiving. Also, regularly reviewing and revising the data management plan is needed as an important aspect, and try to avoid also the common pitfalls by focusing on effective time management, set clear expectations, avoid underestimating technical efforts, maintain strong communication throughout, and plan to avoid last-minute projects. And finally, in terms of knowledge transfer, the ACDH-CH also regularly holds tool galleries, which are part of the CLARIN DH course registry. And in these interactive formats, a diverse range of both theoretical and practical technical skills using different DH tools are taught by experts from the field of digital humanities. You can visit the link on our website to get more information on the upcoming trainings and also on how to participate. And with this, we thank you for your attention. You can reach us at the following email address or connect with us on LinkedIn or Blue Sky. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for having me. As Juliana said, my name is Inés Matres. I work at the Digital Humanities Department of the University of Helsinki. And I will be presenting a little bit two things that I'm doing at the moment. I'm currently one of the coordinators of a network in Finland that develops research infrastructure, but also I'm a part of the Department of DH in Helsinki. So I will be showing a little bit this national, and especially later focusing on the local streams of what is research infrastructure and DH education with the example of the Helsinki Digital Humanities Hackathon. As I didn't know I don't know you, I wanted to first give a little bit of background about myself and how I came to digital humanities and research infrastructure. I'm a product of both migration and interdisciplinary collaboration, which is at the heart of Digital Humanities and the Hackathon. And well, after a master in media studies, I worked a little bit in museums in the fascinating world of collection, documentation, and digitization, which gave me a little bit of background on projects, project management, but also interest on research. So I did my PhD then in European ethnology, which handled the concept of cultural heritage in school education, but had a very special interest in how was this in the background of this digital leap and the digitalization that goes on in schools. So this got me kind of interested in the use of digital cultural heritage data and also a little bit in infrastructures. And that's why now I'm working with in this business of research infrastructures, and which I don't have to explain because it was explained very beautifully by Vincent and also a little bit by our previous colleagues from Austria. So I won't stop here, but of course, research infrastructures are, in my opinion, you could also see them as support systems that enable carrying out of scholarly practices. And we have a network in Europe that's called DARIA, and in Finland as well. So to explain a little bit what DARIA is, I used a little bit CLARIN because I know we would have a little bit background what CLARIN is. And of course, this is an infrastructure that is very close to the research communities that is in close collaboration with them. But DARIA is something that it's a little bit complicated for perhaps for research that doesn't use just language or language data, and also, for example, in digital humanities itself. Because, for example, what in my own department, if a colleague who is, for example, an historian, looking at how utopian fiction novels from the early modern Britain kind of like inspired political elites in their political ideas and speeches. If she's looking at this material, for example, for her PhD, I also have a colleague in Digital Humanities who is a computer scientist who is developing the reception reader, which is the tool that my historian colleague is using. So for a researcher, what research infrastructure is from the point of view of history, for another is research in itself. So for the computer scientist, that is research. So the way I summarize it a little bit for DARIA in Finland is that, well, we work in very interdisciplinary fields, and what we use is the work of the digital humanists as research infrastructures. And well, it's very difficult to put a line where is research and where is research infrastructure. So DARIA is a network of digital humanities and computational social science hubs in Finland. So we are a small country, and it's not that difficult to find the people who are doing digital humanities. And we work together with the National Library and the CSC, which is a public company owned by the universities that offers supercomputer environments. That is, all universities with humanities departments who have one or two affiliated groups to this network. And these are groups who have been pioneer in computational methods or have built already small teams around data sets of national interest, such as could be in Finland. They are very important historical newspapers, as they are the first very, very good representative samples have been digitized since the early 2000s. Also Nordic social media data. We have people working on that, and game research, for example, which is also quite big in Finland. So these are research groups that either collect data or build tools so that this data can be used by other research communities that are not doing digital humanities or computational social sciences, And taking part of this network comes with a compromise to support researchers in their fields and make the datasets, methods, or tools they develop open to other researchers. And one way to do this is, of course, because these are also in essence research groups, we develop digital humanities teaching in our universities. And I will give an example of how the Digital Humanities Hackathon became one of these local manifestations of what research infrastructure is. So the Digital Humanities Hackathon was organized by the first time 2015, and this is the current, at least last year's group of hackathon organizers. This is the computational history group, which is a interdisciplinary research group with about 15 researchers from computer and data science doing machine learning, experts in machine learning, but also we have historians and linguists affiliated. So we are all involved in DH education, both in introductory courses and also methods courses, and also we are open to we do consultation with other researchers. And I myself am more in project management, but also we have people who are kind of connecting with cultural heritage organizations. And the Digital Humanities Hackathon was created by these 4 people. And the head of is Professor Mikko Tolonen with background in intellectual history, Professor Eetu Mäkelä with background in computer science, and as well Jouni Tuominen and Jukka Suomela are also with background in computer science. So the Digital Humanities Hackathon is itself a project. It's a 10-day, I would say it's a different kind of summer school. And it hosts usually for around 40 participants, and it's very much its philosophy behind is collaboration. So there's always the same number of participants from the humanities or social sciences as there is computer and data science participants. And also the data is the protagonist, and I will show a little bit later why. So the idea of the hackathon is to enable teamwork. So each of the 4 teams that each year participate in the hackathon have to familiarize with a certain data set, decide what humanities questions they pose, find a problem that can be solved with help of computational methods, and what lines of investigations they pursue. And I was also asked to give a little bit of background or a backstage view of what it is to organize a hackathon. So this is a really much reliant of teamwork as well. So I have been only involved since last year, so I am also kind of new to this. But they rely very much on at the beginning of each year leads, that is colleagues from the department, and also some people from outside the department and the university have been leading these groups. These are people who know very well some specific data, such as they have been doing their PhDs or research with newspapers or with social media, and they are the ones kind of leading these kind of teams and building also kind of very compelling kind of calls for students to then post their own projects. And then, well, there is a very fast-tracked kind of preparation. There are some icebreaker sessions, but the core of the hackathon happens in person in Helsinki during 10 days in May. And when you're a visitor or where you only view what goes on in the hackathon, this is from the reflection session, this photo from last year, and this is Kat, one of the participants who reflects really well what it is. So she says that even if one does not have a clear view of what is going on at all times in all fronts, everybody was very open to explain. So in that sense, we can also say that a hackathon for the participants is a mini DH project. That is why there is a series of deliverables and milestones, both for team leaders and participants. So preparation starts with the team leaders, and the theme call for application, for example, present a main data set and the topic of a project. We'll see one in a little bit. Possible lines of research that the students can open. This is optional, but it can also give up some prepared research questions for the students to pursue. But these must be also kind of posed by the groups themselves in the first days of the hackathon. So after 2 preparatory meetings that allow participants to get acquainted with the data and each other, they come already with some idea of what they want to do. The intense period of 10 days is also thought as a way for students to practice not just research in their fields, but also and collaboration, of course, with computer scientists or between computer scientists and humanities. But also there's some kind of soft skills like management tasks, time organization, and science communication. For example, quite early on, groups have presentation, for example, and that is an internal deadline that helps settle goals, organize mini groups within teams, and also getting some preliminary feedback. And the final presentations are at the end. They are included, or they are kind of built into a poster, which is also a way to show the process, which in digital humanities is quite important. And it's also a way for them to see that work has what they have taken on and what they have solved or not solved, because it's also important to keep in mind that sometimes you go on a research path and you cannot solve within the small period. So posters are really good ways to documenting the digital humanities. And also it's a way to showcase what computational methods can be in context. So this is the image for the last hackathon poster slam. And I only maybe show, because we don't have that much time, for example, one group. So this was last year's first time that one of the team leaders chose Eurovision Song Contest from the last 20 years as the data set that the group would revisit. And their group project, Fairy Tales, Wild Dances, and Hard Rock Hallelujah, was a pioneer in approaching audiovisual content in this hackathon event. This was an original research and delved into the lyrics, performance visuals, and artist networks found. And they found that if these elements, so the lyrics, the topics, the kind of the performance visuals, and the posterior or the networks that they built, if they were mixed up, they would contain the secret recipe for a winner in the next Eurovision Song Contest. And here is an excerpt from their poster showing how the group made use of, for example, sentiment analysis and topic modeling to delve in the topics that were successful in past Eurovision Song Contests. And so for me, I'm really coming quite new to this because my background is more in ethnography, and this hackathon I will be, for example, we have these 4 themes this year, and historical newspapers have been used very often, parliamentary data, social media as well, but we are handling also oral history and life history interviews this year. So I cannot tell you very much about this because we are starting. But this is going to be also a year for new things. So everybody welcome to follow the hackathon and apply or share this news with others. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Juliana. And thank you everyone for having me. Very, very happy to be here. As Juliana said, this is a little bit of perspective on management, and particularly high performance, or as I call it, hyper performance project management, with a digital humanities perspective that's been filtered through industry. So I think we're going to touch on a couple of concepts, at least, that we've already seen so far. But it will also come, I think, with a lot of very, very interesting new stuff. Went down pretty well when I put it across, with some of the similar concepts across last summer in Lisbon. Hopefully going to cause some excitement here as well. So this is actually supposed to be a two-person presentation with myself and my frequent partner in crime and several-time colleague Supriya Rai. In tandem, unfortunately, rather like Natalia, she's had to excuse herself today on account of the fact that she's ill. But fret not, we put this together between the two of us. You will still be benefiting from the full extent of her considerable expertise in these fields. So a brief introduction to the two of us. As Juliana said, I'm a graduate, a son of the DH, graduated from KCL in 2017. I'm a product and software specialist, had a very varied career, but a lot of it is kind of either breaks down to that or is adjacent to that. Very, very wide and diverse industry experience. Founded a couple of startups myself. I'm also a Substacker for Supriya. She is not a DH grad herself, but she has profound expertise in everything high performance management related. She's a former theoretical physicist. She has developed world-class technology in various industry verticals and patented hardware as well. Many, many, many times awarded, also a couple of times startup founders. So hopefully we know what we're talking about when we get into the nitty-gritty of high performance management. We'll find out very shortly, I suppose. So a couple of quotes here setting the stage. So one from Charlie Munger, the late partner of Warren Buffett, who I imagine a number of you will probably be roughly familiar with on account of his role in building up the company Berkshire Hathaway into one of the most successful companies ever built, especially from a capital allocation and management perspective, emphasizing the fact that the management approach that he and Buffett took with Berkshire was not at all based on complex frameworks or in-depth and in-detail schemas, but on what he called the unrecognized simplicities of effective action. And then a quote from Butler Lampson, a truly world-class 20th century computer scientist who worked at the Palo Alto Research Center, was very, very closely involved in the development of what came eventually to be the personal computer, describing the management approach of a guy called Bob Taylor, who managed that project, saying that he had no idea whatsoever how Taylor managed to get so many profoundly gifted people working on such an extraordinary project that enjoyed such extraordinary success. It just seemed like magic. Well, we're going to try and demystify the magic that he's talking about there, because the magic that he's talking about is high-performance management. So the pitch, I suppose, if there's a pitch here, is that there are lots and lots of institutions around the world, tertiary academic institutions, that offer management degrees or modules. And what these management modules tend to do is they tend to trap students in the same sorts of, as it says, here's suboptimal ways of thinking about the way that management of complex, or for that matter, simple systems can work, should work, will work. And there's a huge opportunity here as our world grows in complexity, as the many different countries around the world start to slide into skills deficits or positions where they can't harness all of the skill capital they have in their educated populations. For the digital humanities to do something profoundly influential, something hugely valuable in terms of actually being able to train students in high performance management, which, surprise though it may be to some of you, or for that matter, it may not come as a surprise to some of you, is not really what most management modules around the world are that interested in teaching. And this means how you can produce extreme results as a manager yourself, but it also would involve how to do great work in spite of being surrounded by suboptimal management architectures. We have all, or if we haven't so far, we will all know exactly what the latter circumstance is like. And hopefully also, especially if we're minded to follow some of the lessons of high performance management, rather, we'll also know what the former is like. So why am I bringing this to you? Why am I bringing these kinds of industry perspectives into the conversation here? So there's a twofold potential benefit here. The first one is for students, Any student who knows these skills will be able to get vastly more output out of any project that they ever take charge of. That in and of itself is, that would be reason by itself, I think, to seriously discuss this. They will know more about the common pitfalls, fallacies, and flawed thinking that reigns in conventional halls of management thinking. If they understand what high performance management looks like, and this can have, needless to say, vast compounding returns on their the overall output they manage to get out of their working life. And it's also, simply speaking, a priceless vocational skill. It makes difficult things easy. It makes things that can be quite bland and quite uninspiring into things that are considerably more enjoyable. And then there's also a benefit for the digital humanities as a discipline. Now, the digital humanities is inherently interdisciplinary. We all know this. We've all benefited massively from this in our lives and careers since we've studied it. Teaching something like this would be a really critical broadening of that essence with what I consider to be the ultimate interdisciplinary vocational science, how you bring different ways of thinking together to work together in a really, really high output fashion. It's a huge bargaining chip with students who are more vocationally minded. We can go to students and pitch them saying, well, among all the other things you can learn on a DH degree, you'll also learn secrets of how to manage complex or small or large projects that basically no other management degree anywhere will touch. And if we can use something like this to guarantee postgraduate success, then obviously that's going to reflect very, very well, very creditably upon the discipline in of itself and attract a lot more attention to it. So let's move on to the basics of hyper performance. We'll go through them all step by step. So the first item is deep subject matter knowledge. Now, all great managers, all really, really great managers, are what I call gray collar. They can work at a strategic level. They can work above the day-to-day and the nitty-gritty in a given workflow, but they have a very, very intimate knowledge of what I call the shop floor, what the people who are actually at the most foundational productive layer, what they're doing. And you can see this illustrated if you think about what was happening in two different strands of manufacturing in the 20th century. If you look at Japan, you had managers who were individual and independent contributors. They worked on the factory floor as well as dealing with a lot of things on a strategic and technical level. It meant legendary quality control. It's obviously what Japan was, and for that matter still is known for, and very, very high productivity gains. Now, Britain, on the other hand, which obviously had been the foremost industrial power in the world at one point, bred a culture of management where managers rarely took to the floor. They didn't really have very much understanding of the general workflows or how to improve individual processes within it. And as a result, productivity and quality control both slowly trended downwards. Principle number 2 is systems thinking. So really hyper-performant managers, they never think of any given problem in isolation. There's 2 examples here of that. So one, we're going very, very far back for this, shows you that these principles are not anything contemporary in many cases. They're studied throughout history. They can think of problems in abstract terms. So for instance, when the state of Prussia prior to the unification of Germany was really on its upward trajectory as a developing industrialized nation in the 19th century, and we're considering how military command ought to work, you had Helmut Moltke Sr., who had the very, very bright idea that the way that they would win conflicts in the day and age in which they were was not necessarily through improved battlefield tactics, but improved logistics, particularly with railways. It was a very, very unusual kind of leap of inspiration, but I think a real hallmark of this kind of thinking. They can also think of problems in ensemble terms. As was the case with Apple, they built up their massive competitive advantage that they still have to this day over most other hardware and software producers by understanding that you didn't create the biggest advantage by just looking at one or even at separate individual parts along a workflow or along a development cycle, but by conceiving of all those elements together and understanding how they interacted. So systems thinking, very, very important. A focus on skills and training. Now, even the best manager, if they are individually skillful, only has one pair of hands. Their primary job above all other jobs, certainly in my own view, and in the view of other people I know who adhere to these principles, and in the historical record of this kind of approach to management, they really believe that the essence to this kind of management approach is spreading skill capital as far and wide as you can. You need to spread it to as many hands as you possibly can. If you can do that, performance will compound dramatically. As it says here, a manager aiming at getting that kind of hyper performance out of a team will focus probably up to half of their time on building out individual team members' skill capital. That means you can devolve ownership much more effectively. You'll have much prouder, more fulfilled, more capable feeling and confident team members. And the unit just grows progressively more and more high performance. Following on from that, the combination of responsibility and authority in individuals is also a really important part of this. So most standard management, again, as it says here, defaults to micromanagement. We have all suffered from it. We all know how painful it is. Subordinates will be meddled with. There will be poorly conceived project scopes, or there will be project scopes that are mounted at the last minute, as we heard about in our first presentation today. There will be complex framework usages, and the frameworks are so difficult to understand that it actually takes more time to understand them than it does to do the follow-on work. It's the hallmark of a low trust system. Now, high performance management is intrinsically high trust. It involves managers giving their teams both the responsibility and authority to execute on plans and achieve objectives that are well and collectively understood. The method of doing so is then devolved to the people who really understand how these things work at the base level. So responsibility provides ownership, and ownership encourages that sort of level of engagement and investment on the part of the people working. And then obviously putting that authority in the same place means that people can change courses when necessary. They can grab for innovations if they should see that there's an opportunity to do so. And it really, really gets the kind of creative synapses of any given team or team member firing. See a really good example of this here. So there was once upon a time a company that I'm sure none of you will have heard of. I certainly hadn't heard of it before I read the book that it's linked to in this hyperlink here. A company called Capital Cities Broadcasting, founded in America, run by a guy called Tom Murphy, who was a high-performance management machine, and he was particularly nuts, as it says here, about combining responsibility with authority, and his company was 4 times as successful as its peers over a 30-year period. If you want to find out more about how he did that, you can read that book. It's excellent. Last main item is decentralization of control. So as a high-performance manager, most of your work is involved in the preparation of your team for the task ahead. Once they are knowledge equipped, once they have the grasp of the system, once they understand exactly what the objectives are, the high-performance manager will do, as it says here, what average managers are taught to fear. They will sit back and let their team get on with whatever is in front of them. They're actually, in many respects, almost remarkably inactive seeming after the starting gun has been sounded, except to occasionally refocus the unit or to step in if there is a particularly complex or high importance error that the team or challenge that the team has encountered or made. They rarely need to interfere, because if they have followed these edicts very, very well, they've equipped the team very, very effectively to deal with all the kinds of problems they're likely to encounter, and the team will correct errors and come across moments of inspiration through the process on their own. A couple of stories from the front. I'm just checking how much time I have. I think I have enough time for this. So funnily enough, this is also a hackathon story from Supriya. In a previous company, they had a lot of information siloing and a very, very top-down approach to innovation. They weren't getting the best out of the entirety of the team in terms of being able to really, really valuably create new concepts for new products. So she devised a hackathon strategy to release that collaborative energy. She gave different leads a responsibility for fixing tasks and building the different hack teams. They were able really for the first time to look at the company's future in terms of its output as a whole integrated conception, and it led to enormous productivity and development rate increases. They basically went from not producing as much stuff as they wanted to, if anything, producing even more than they needed to. And this shows a few of these principles in action: decentralization, giving that responsibility out, trusting people and their skills and their commitment to be able to get things from A to B, combination of responsibility and authority alongside that, and then really getting people to consider the entire company's as a collective organism, as opposed to a bunch of individual component parts. And then in another example she's provided here, where she was working with teams with extremely specialized employees who were being tasked with essentially doing a bunch of repetitive busy work that was beneath their talents. Supriya decided to take responsibility for that, even though it wasn't actually her team, set up automations for those repetitive tasks, removing a lot of obstacles from the team's path, and then actually taught the teams to code herself to allow them to take on more sophisticated, high output work. And this was obviously great for those individual team members and also great for the crew's bottom line. A couple of stories from me as well. Just move through these very quickly. Something very, very similar myself, working in a pharma company, team having to use very, very outdated software. Rest of management very, very reluctant to rock the boat. I then taught the team to code so that they could basically work with APIs instead of working with this extremely high friction front end. And because we no longer had to rely on interfacing through the UX, tasks took up to 90% less time. And then another example that I'm particularly fond of reminiscing on when I was designing a news website that did everything that you weren't supposed to do when you're building media user experiences and media websites. Because I believe that I had an insight that if you optimize certain things very, very far up the chain of people starting to read things, it would then lead to them reading more things and reading them in a more conducive and constructive mindset, which proved to be exactly the case. So just to wrap up, a few things. I'm imagining there's a lot of things that you may have noticed about this philosophy. Hopefully there'll be some interesting questions. Looking forward to answering them if there are. 3 things that you might have noticed about the credo of high performance management. Number 1, it's very, very easy to understand. This is not complex framework bound. There are not very, very recondite schemas that power this. It's all very, very simple. In fact, it's all about making things that would otherwise be complex simple to the greatest possible extent. It's really, really key consideration for this. And the third thing that you've noticed is that you may even have a hard time imagining how this would work, because you may never have actually seen anything be managed like this. Very, very few things are. Very successful things are. And indeed, if you look at things like how the PC was invented, how the Apollo project came to its highest pinnacle of fruition and success, or how countries went from, like Singapore, for instance, went from being a country in the developing world to being one that leads the majority of the developed world on lots of very, very important human development indexes. They all abided by this kind of management approach to get things going. I think we should put this power into the hands of digital humanity, Freudian slip, digital humanities students. I've had many people come up to me since I graduated to ask my advice about taking DH principles, DH learnings into industry. What can they use? What can they optimize for? What's highest leverage? In my opinion, that something like this could be one of the most leverageable things that we could ever give to digital humanities students. It's worked for me. I'm certain it will work for anyone as might pick it up. Thank you very much for listening. Something a little bit different. I hope you enjoyed. And as I say, I look forward to answering any and all questions.